presentation. I want to welcome people to our presentation today and wish you all a happy spring. It's nice that you could come in for the event, even though it's still really nice outside. So it's a tough one. Our hope is that you will find lots of things that you'll want to look into more after this presentation, because it's a really interesting subject. And I know when I started reading about it, there's a lot of history that is pertinent to our area. So one of the other things that I wanted to do is let people know that what our activity with the Head of the Lakes chapter is going to be next month. And we will be meeting on April 24th, that's Sunday, at 1 o'clock at Hartley Nature Center. And we'll be doing an outdoor walk with John Latimer. Many people know John. He's a leading phenologist and has his own radio program that he does on out of Grand Rapids on KAXE. And we're really excited to do this walk with him. He's very entertaining and it should be very much fun. So look forward to that. And we will be posting more about that on the website, on the Facebook page, and send out a notice in email. The other folks that are helping us to present this today is the Finland Wild Rice Project. And that project is just started last year, and it aims to provide educational training, mentorship, and a sense of responsibility to protect the rights of Manuman wild rice and opportunities for learning about all aspects of it. So if I put the website in the chat, and you can go there and actually sign up to be mentored or to be a mentor if you'd like during ricing season. So that's an exciting thing that is going to be available. The other thing I want to do is welcome Marnie Keski from 1854 Treaty Authority. She's going to be doing the presentation today. She's the educational and cultural contact with the 1854 Treaty Authority, and we are very excited to have her with us today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Marnie.
Thank you so much, Sherry. How you guys doing today?
Doing good.
All right, there we go. It's beautiful out. I was kind of cursing the weather because I was expecting to have at least a month more left for skiing, but I don't know, after 55 degrees, it's pretty rough. Anyways, bonjour, Marnie Indigenous, Gawin and Dodo Damesin, Onagamin Singanda, Giguzi Binson Dunjaba, 1854 Treaty Authority, Nindanoki, Miigwech, meet you. My name is Marnie. I am the Cultural Preservation Specialist with the 1854 Treaty Authority, as Sherry said. I oversee our education and outreach programming within our division, the Education Outreach Division, which was established about 7 years ago when I was hired in this capacity. So can I get a show of hands? Can you guys give me a one of these little reactions in the Zoom if you have heard of the 1854 Treaty Authority before? I got about 9. All right, sweet. That's great. It's more than we usually have. So I am going to roll through the PowerPoint that my boss, Sunny, and I give most frequently, just talking about how to comprehend, understand treaty rights, usufructuary treaty rights, telling our story, telling our history and how we came about and how we implement the harvest for our constituency. So I'll run through this PowerPoint hopefully not bore you guys too much. And Sherry and I were thinking maybe you should throw your questions in the chat. And then we can do a Q&A at the end. I don't mind if you would, ask your questions with your voice. Makes me feel a little less alone over here on this side. But if I was in your shoes, I'd need to write the question down so I wouldn't forget it. So feel free to use the chat for that. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen now. All right, how we looking?
Mhm.
All right,
Good.
awesome. I love the fact that Sherry just told me it's actually head of the lake, like the big pond, the big lake. So I fixed that right away. Not head of the lakes, master naturalist. That's another thing. I was glad to be contacted by you guys because I am a master naturalist. I used to work for the Regis Sanctuary in the Door Peninsula, Wisconsin, and we used to host a master naturalist training program also. So kudos to you guys for learning a little bit more about your relatives that you live with on the landscape. So for those of you that don't know, the 1854 Treaty Authority is an intertribal natural resource management agency that works for both the Boyes Fort Band as well as the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. And basically our role is twofold. It's one, to implement treaty rights harvest, and secondly, to protect treaty rights harvest as well as the resources on which those rights are based. And where we do this is essentially within the Arrowhead region. All of the land that was ceded or given to the United States government northeastern Minnesota, present day northeastern Minnesota, mind you, 4 years before statehood. What we call the 1854 ceded territory. If any of you guys are lucky enough to have been driving around to see the new road boundary signs when entering the ceded territory, that has been a 10-year project in the making. And we are really excited to actually see those come to fruition as of November 2021. So, yep, that's who we are. Little foreshadowing, some rice on the bottom right. Does anybody know which rice lake that is? No takers. I always try to throw in a little trivia here and there, make sure you guys, because I know that Sherry's a big ricer. I don't know if any of the rest of you are. That is Stone Lake, actually.
I know Stone Lake.
The rice off that lake always, it causes the people that we are in rice camp with to always like drool because those kernels are so big. So, you guys live here, right? 1854 ceded territory. Well, what does it contain? It's about 5.5 million acres and encompasses 6 counties, Cook and Lake County in total, most of St. Louis and Aitkin County, a little bit of Pine and I just changed the map here, so. Oh, come on, Marn.
Carlton.
Thank you. I was like, Aiken? Oh, I already said that. Thank you. Let me see. We have 12 state parks within. We have about 45% of the public landmass, federal public landmass, is within the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and Superior National Forest. We also have 3 Indian reservations, right? The Grand Portage Reservation, Fond du Lac, as well as the Vermilion Tract of the Boyes Fort Reservation System. And we have a Great Lakes shoreline. So when in describing who we are and what we do, I'd like to kind of draw comparisons to other natural resource management agencies that you guys might know of to kind of compare and contrast. So 1854, I said, is a natural resource management agency. Can anybody shout out and let me know if they can think of any other natural resource management agencies?
DNR.
Da, 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 da. Minnesota DNR, right? They do a lot of great stuff. Environmental related, forestry. My favorite thing to do is like maintaining public right-of-ways, like trail systems and boat launches, so we can access some of the inland waters and take our families fishing. They work for the people of Minnesota and they work statewide. Can anybody think broader and give me another example of a natural resource management agency?
Forestry Service.
You said forestry? Forest Service?
Yep.
All right, way to go. Yep. See those trucks around? They have a lot of facilities near here. I like to talk about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because I used to do some contract work with them, and their target or their main charge is focus on plant and animal species that aren't doing so hot, right? So what we know of is threatened and endangered species. They work nationwide and they work for the people of the United States. Likewise, 1854, we work within the lands, northeastern Minnesota, ceded to the United States government in the year of 1854. And we work for the Boyce Fort and the Grand Portage bands. And our purpose is to maintain a food source, essentially. So our story starts thousands of years ago, right? Before there was color, everything was in black and white, clearly. And the way of life was determined by the season. For instance, right now, we're watching the snow melt. And if any of you guys were putting taps in earlier this week, I think last weekend was when it started running, we would be heading to the sugar bush, right? We'd be heading to the sugar bush, setting up camp. We'd be celebrating seeing friends and family again, as well as mourning those that didn't make it through the wintertime. And as the ice clears off of all our waterways, we'd be cruising around in our G-Man and our canoe, using the vast amounts of water highways that we have here to move and shake for transportation. Then at the end of the season, summer season, it was the Menominee-Kagizis, is the Menominee-Kagizis in the end of summer. And I'd be heading to rice camp to harvest wild rice. And then with 13 months of winter, we can't just go to the grocery store to pick up dinner or Papa Murphy's. We have to go catch it. So we'd be heading out to the dark house on the lake to catch our dinner. And the cool thing about those of us who live here, you don't need me to tell you this, is that these aren't just activities past, right? We're very fortunate that we have a lot of green space and well-maintained resources that we're able to continue these practices, right? Also the fact that they're shared resources and anybody can learn to participate with them, you know? So what do we call this? We call this subsistence, right? A way of survival, a life way that is very much entwined with the environment in which we live. I'm going to kind of shift gears here. Does anybody want to shout out and tell me what a treaty is?
It's an agreement between two parties.
Thank you, Mary. Yes.
Between
It is an
sovereign nations.
There you go. You want to talk, Jamie? Or Jane, I'm sorry. You guys definitely passed 6th grade, I can tell. Yes, treaty agreement between two or more parties. And what is a treaty? Well, it's a lot deeper than just like an agreement, right? It's a very binding covenant, if you will, right? Hard to break. Again, comparison, the most renowned treaty that we have in the United States history is a Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783. Does anybody know what that treaty did? It did two things.
Was that Louisiana Purchase?
From
Northern
what I
boundary-
know,
Northern boundary of the United States.
wow, that's a good one too. I had not heard that. I usually get the answer of Louisiana Purchase, but the Treaty of Paris, most importantly, declared American independence from Great Britain and also ended the Revolutionary War. Clearly, I need to do a better job in making sure that I read through that treaty and see if those things that you guys suggested are in fact true also.
My error, I think, is 1787 that they set the northern boundary that includes Minnesota with
Oh,
Ben
okay.
Franklin.
Cool. I love presentations where I get to learn more too. Thank you. Thank you for educating me. And again, treaties aren't just a thing of the past, right? Our nation is still signing treaties today. In fact, last year there were 46 treaties signed between the US and foreign governments. Most of them are related to trade, even though in the past they could have been peace treaties or land cession treaties, things like that. It's kind of surprising that last year there were only about 46 treaties signed between the US and foreign nations, when in years prior to that, it was probably double that amount. So the treaty that I'm here talking about today, the 1854 treaty, it was done in respect of and honoring people that were a part of a group, right? Understanding that when the United States representatives approached these folks holding first land title, they respected them as sovereigns, as self-ruling peoples. So to give you guys a little history of how this treaty went down, these are my cliff notes. United States is looking at this area, the Arrowhead region, and thinking, wow, great timber resources, minerals. We'd love to, set up some land ownership, right? Bring that land into taxation, some agriculture, things like that. But again, these weren't vacant lands. And actually a lot of an economy had been functioning for about 200 years before this time. It brought a lot of different people to the landscape, not just Europeans from a specific country, but many Europeans along with the natives. Does anybody know what economy that was?
Beaver.
Yes, fur trade. You got it. And if you guys haven't been up to the Grand Portage National Monument, I highly suggest that you get up there to check out some of their, reenactment stuff they do in the summertime on the stockade, as well as just going through what they have in terms of display in their installations inside. It's really amazing the knowledge that they have about how that land was used and who was there and what was moved and things like that. Right, so there's a fur trade going on. These aren't vacant lands, and surprisingly, the United States government is in a American Indian policy period of which they have to handle diplomacy via working with the leadership of the indigenous folks in order to establish how they go about business, which was inconsistent and very different from the other policy periods that the United States functioned under throughout its establishment. So US leaders said to these native leaders, hey guys, we'd like to offer you an agreement. if you hand over your lands, we'll decide, we'll make sure to provide you with a piece of property in which you'll be able to live forevermore, you know, however you and your community wants to live. Within reservations, those established reservations. Also, they wanted to throw in and include some payments, some annuity payments to be paid to these people's goods and services given to them once a year. And this was an era where there was a lot of treaty signing happening as well as settlement. And although there was some development of interpretation and language availability, you never know if the interpretation was done truthfully, right? There was a lot of coercion that had happened between some of these representatives in the United States and blackmail. And I can't imagine being in their shoes at the time. But the native leaders said, hey guys, you know what? We will agree to your terms. Obviously, this is being forced upon us. However, we want to be able to make sure that we are able to feed our families and live the way that we always have been able to live, our way of life. We want to make sure that our way of life is going to be protected. And surprisingly, they got their wish, their compromise recognized in Article 11 of that treaty, and such of them as reside in the territory hereby ceded shall have the right to hunt and fish therein until otherwise ordered by the president. So as I mentioned, the 54 treaty, there was a bunch of treaties in this area in the Western Great Lakes area that included usufructuary rights of native peoples. Usufructuary is a term, it's like a legal term that means something belonging to somebody else who, you know, somebody else owns it, essentially. It's used a lot in like mining terminology, right? So usufructuary rights were identified in each of these 4 treaty areas, in these 4 treaties signed between natives in the US. The thing that set the 54 treaty apart from these other 3 was that it established the reservation systems in what's the Minnesota territory, northern Michigan, as well as northwestern Wisconsin. And again, I'd encourage you guys to check out these treaties and read them. The language is really quite interesting. The leadership is quite prominent. You can kind of grasp from how they're written about who was outspoken at some of these discussions. And the boundary lines were really quite interesting, how they identify the boundaries. By such and such the bend of the river and things like that. It's really unique. If you want to read the treaty, the 54 treaty is on our website. And the other 3 I know probably are listed on Glyphic's website, our sister organization over in Odana, Wisconsin. And even the Constitution of the United States defines treaty agreements as the supreme law of the land. So I do a lot of these presentations from itty bitty little Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, all the way up to like state tribal relations trainings and continuing education for liaison work between agencies, right? And one of the biggest misconceptions that we still have in the general public is that folks are willing to argue that the treaties are so old they don't matter anymore. They shouldn't matter, right? When again, if you consider all the legalities behind it and how it's written, recognized in the Constitution, it's a very heavy land exchange agreement, right? Comparatively, if we were going to do away with the 54 treaty, would these lands revert back to tribal ownership? Likewise, if we did away with the Treaty of Paris, this is where I get a little goofy, and I like to joke around thinking about like, how would that change our way of life, right? and I do need to make a key point here. Way back in 1905, this is before the First World War, there's a Supreme Court case called the Winans case that identified that rights identified in treaty agreements are not a grant of rights to tribes, but a grant of rights from them. Another misconception amongst the public is that usufructuary treaty rights are special rights given to Indian people, when in fact they were reserved from a way of life on this landscape well before settlement. They continue to have these rights and way of life now, and they'll have them into the future by way of Indigenous obligation to their relatives. This is what's known as the reserved rights doctrine. It's not something that just came to fruition during settlement, you know. All right, this is where I need to ask you guys to hang tight for a minute, because I'm gonna blow through some case law that gave rise to how treaty rights are recognized here in our home turf. So I'm gonna bust through some federal case law for a minute, where the tribe sought the affirmation of the rights and won. Starting with 1942, the Thule case out in the state of Washington found that treaty rights takes precedence over state law. It's still something that's contested nowadays, because the federal government did give fish and game regulations. They handed that down to states, you know, management, and it's something that's highly contested because of sovereignty agreements being between the U.S. and the tribes. Next, about 20 years later, a little bit down the coast, still in the Pacific Northwest, the Bologna decision came across. They found that the state is limited in its power to regulate Indian fisheries. Essentially, this court case is kind of interesting. Found that, I always like to describe it as like, well, yes, if you have the right to harvest, you should have the rights to manage, right? Not only the fish and game, but also like the regulatory process for your constituency. And there's a lot of other things that went on with this Bologna decision I actually learned about today when assessing comparisons of contemporary and heritage fish consumption rates that came out of the Columbia River Basin up there in the Pacific Northwest. Then a little bit closer to home, 1983, Le Coudray in Wisconsin. The Voigt decision recognized usufructuary rights in the upper Midwest, essentially. And this is a big deal. This is right in the middle of the AIM movement, American Indian movement. And there was a lot of interest and drive to return to practices, Indigenous practices, traditional practices. And likewise at the time, you know, there was, during this Voigt decision and after as well, there's a lot of opposition taking the form of protests happening on boat launches within northern Wisconsin, throughout lakes up there. And this is particularly due to spearing season of walleye, right? So spearing season of walleye happens when the females come into the shallows of the inland lakes, and they're able to spot them with, because they have reflective eyes, you know. This is right as the ice goes off of the lake, and also definitely before the season opener, the state opener. And there were a lot of citizens that were like, whoa, these are our fish, or these are a shared resource, and this is my way of life with my family, and we can't stand for this stuff. So there definitely needed to be more legal determination throughout to settle this, as well as enforce the protection of those who are going out to harvest, to make sure nobody was going to get hurt. So back up this way, in our neck of the woods, Grand Portage got wind of how the tribes were taking some of these matters into their own hands, whether in the court systems and otherwise, to have those rights recognized and affirmed. And so Grand Portage did just that. They filed suit with the U.S. District Court seeking a declaration on the rights, the for affirmation of the rights. And the other two bands that live within the ceded lands or have those rights also join that suit. And a few years in between there is, you know, that sometimes our legal process takes a little bit while to shake out. The state of Minnesota stepped in and said, whoa, 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 whoa. We will let you guys harvest. We'll let you follow through with your treaty harvest if you agree to this agreement with us. We know that federal court cases can take a really long time, as well as they're very costly. So we just want to make sure that we're able to manage 2 harvest seasons per 2 groups, tribal, non-tribal. We want to make sure that there are some elements that we can agree to make sure that this agreement, or to make sure that we can follow through with implementing. And what is included in that? Well, there would have to be a development of a conservation code, so rules and regulations to abide by while harvesting. There could be no commercial harvest. This point is really interesting because of the of how usufructuary treaty rights are recognized throughout Indian country across the board. There's a hot spot in the Western Great Lakes and there's a hot spot in the Pacific Northwest. And the Pacific Northwest and Alaska do have commercial activities as part of their harvest rights, as part of treaty rights, which is kind of interesting. This agreement also entailed there'd be no treaty season outside of state season, and that to this day, this is still the same case. Most of the time. The agreement also included some cross-deputization of enforcement agents so that both parties could oversee the codes, tribal and non-tribal, per tribal and non-tribal parties. And lastly, there'd have to be a judicial system established, right? So if there's ever a violation of that code, it could be tried in tribal court. And so the organization that was established to implement that agreement was called the Tri-Band Authority. Following the year, the Fond du Lac Band withdrew from the agreement and calling for a name change. And to this day, we continue to implement this agreement as the 1854 Treaty Authority. We have 15 full-time employees and a few seasonals that we take on in the summer. And our organization consists of 4 different divisions: administrative resource management, which is our biology, education outreach, as well as conservation enforcement. We get these questions a lot about, like, I don't understand, your organization's so weird. Is there any other group that does what you do? Why, yes, there is, because of the treaty era and the United States signing so many treaties with Indian nations for land cession, as well as usufructuary rights. There are 5 intertribal consortiums throughout the US that do what we do and working for the tribes to oversee management, protection, and implementation of harvest under different treaties. There are 3 in the Western Great Lakes, 1854, the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission in Wisconsin. They oversee a handful of different tribes, like 13. And then CORA, the Chippewa-Ottawa Resource Authority over in the UP, the Eastern UP, doing most of their work on fisheries. The 2 big, huge organizations exist within the Pacific Northwest, CRITFIC and NIFWIC. And they work for a huge swath of land and major giant acreage and mileage of corridors that they work with. Their story has been really interesting to kind of witness how they've gone about implementation of their rights and affirmation of their rights. I could give you guys some more reading if you're interested in that area. We are funded through Bureau of Indian Affairs under the Public Law 638 contracts, which is self-determination contracts. These were called as I mentioned, intertribal consortiums. What I need to make sure that you guys understand is that 1854 is not a special interest group, right? We get our authority and jurisdiction through the Constitution of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, of which both of our bands we work for are members of. And we're a governmental entity, and therefore we have judicial and regulatory authority over our enrollees for exercising off-reservation harvest. So basically, 1854 is here to support our membership to pursue their subsistence harvest activities. And we do that through a variety of ways. We support implementation. For instance, if one of our band members comes to us with the required paperwork, we're able to turn around and provide them with an 1854 ID card, which acts as a ricing permit, fishing license, small game hunting permit, but not big game, as well as an entry permit for the BWCA. Our board of directors is comprised of both tribal councils that get together about every 2 months to pass policy, things for our organization, as well as to approve seasons and bag limits. Over here on the screen is a picture of our, well, it's fishing seasons from 17, I think. We also maintain a conservation code, right? Because things change. So about every 5 years or so, there might be some changes into safety because of new equipment, or there might be changes because of technology or interests amongst the general public. I think, like, to give you guys an example, a couple of things that have changed in the last few years. Folks are now able to wear blaze pink, and there's a huge interest within the like home decor field, I guess you might call it, to use more paper birch, right? It's a beautiful tree. A lot of people are harvesting paper birch over all the trees themselves, and not just the birch bark, and bringing them inside their homes to use for decorational purposes. And white birch ain't doing so hot within climate change. They're a climate change loser. So we wanted to make sure there was going to be some protections identified in our last update of the conservation code for our wigwas, for our paper birch. And also, hunting big game, it's hard. It's physically demanding, right? It's also using a lot of machinery and equipment that someone should be well trained on. So we do host firearm safety trainings, certificate trainings, as well as ATV and snowmobiles to make sure that our
Was it fun today?
to make sure that our constituency is going to be safe, right? And we trust them, and we've seen them in action. So I want to roll through. Oh, I'm at 40 minutes already. Sorry, I went a little bit long. I'm better when there's like people around me. I can read the room a little bit better. Anyways, just want to kind of go over our goals, what we do on the daily. Right, our main purpose is to support our membership and their activities. It's really our bread and butter. So how do we implement? Well, if we're going to set up a deer hunt, what do we need to do? Establish a permitting system, identify registration stations, communicate all the information out to our bands through the systems that exist. Goal 2, there's still a lot of interest and effort to diminish rights. So our staff works very hard in letter writing for aspects of treaty harvest that doesn't diminish access, right? So that means like keeping public lands intact, keeping public lands in public ownership. It means also arguing for, not arguing, we're like discussing with our management partners about, hey, if you're gonna close a lake to make it a wildlife refuge, a waterfowl refuge, that means it's closed to harvesting of all sorts of that waterfowl as well as rice. We want to make sure that those areas are open for our band members to pursue their treaty harvest. Goal 3, this is where I get really excited because my background is in ecology and I was hired in 2007 by the 1854 Treaty Authority when the gray wolf was delisted to work with our biologists at the time to get a better idea of gray wolf population and range within the Duluth urban rural interface. And so I love the fact that we have a crew that gets out and monitors the well-being of these culturally significant species in our landscape. So like, what good is it, right, if there are no resources, or if these resources are of such poor quality that it may negatively impact human health? So those are just two things that we ask ourselves on a daily. So two of the most important resources for the bands are moose. Right there's a picture of Morgan, our wildlife biologist, up with the Minnesota moose monitoring team. She goes up every January to do aerial moose surveys. And here's a brain buster for you. Why do you think January might be a time where they focus their aerial monitoring efforts?
You can see them.
Thank you, Eugene. Yes. Surprisingly, when I give this presentation to adults versus like youth, the youth are thinking really hard, like, this has got to be some serious science behind why this happens, right? And a lot of the times they suggest, well, it's because the leaves are down there, able to see them. But in fact, science doesn't have to be that hard and intricate. Really, it's as easy as identifying a big, dark animal against a white background. If there's any month that we're bound to have snow, it's probably smack dab in the winter, middle of winter in January. Next, most importantly, is Monoman. Here's a picture of Darren out on, I think it was Cabin Lake, way long ago. For those of you who are interested in ricing or looking to gain more information for where to go, we do maintain wild rice updates on our webpage that is made available to the public every season to encourage the fact that people get out and try harvesting. If that's not you and you want a little more support by finding out what's all included with ricing, every year we host a Monoman harvest workshop or a camp, if you will, usually in conjunction with some of our project partners. Fond du Lac Camp has been a long time partner on that one. But we usually try to set it up within the Duluth area for a rice lake around here, and it's open to the public, right? We want to encourage folks to get out. For those that have maybe never been in a canoe, provide an opportunity to get out on the water, to utilize harvest equipment such as flails, wild rice knocking sticks, or push pole. And to just demonstrate how one might go about processing or finishing the rice on land. And networking, right? Another species that is of concern to our bands is ogaz, walleye. And so our fisheries crew, we work with a bunch of different partners on monitoring the young of the year populations. Twice a year, they'll get out overnight in electrofishing boats to do an inland survey of walleye, go spring and fall. Now they're just waiting, they're counting down the clocks right now until ice out, and then they'll get out and do spring survey. All right, we have environmental biologists here that are keeping tabs on the things that we can't see, right? Our air and water quality, and making sure that the organizations and agencies that are involved with mining are doing their due diligence of consultation with the bands. We have invasive species staff, right? Because we now live within a global society where things are hitching rides on our shoes and our equipment. We want to get the word out about some of these new arrivals to the landscape and maybe how to curb their establishment and maybe how they might be detrimental. Let's get the word out about how they might be detrimental to our way of life right now. This is really exciting. This is one of my favorite projects that resource management works on. The reestablishment project, the restoration project of lake sturgeon within the St. Louis River estuary. Early 1900s, the population was extirpated, basically over harvested, and the water quality was so poor that they were no longer found here. And ourselves with Fond du Lac, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Minnesota DNR, and Wisconsin DNR have worked to reestablish a population that, as of 3 years ago, is naturally reproducing again within the St. Louis. So I think that's really, really exciting, a long-term project that we can finally see some results from. And lastly, how do we learn to manage, support, and maybe adapt some of these species in a changing climate? You know, how do we take care of these things that have taken care of ourselves forever? You know, and now it's like an unstable, unknown future. Lastly, the goal of education and outreach is to preserve culture. We really want to know that we're going to maintain knowledgeable harvesters. And so my work is to work with tribal youth and families on harnessing and cultivating those traditional and adapted harvest skills. Yeah. I know I mentioned a couple things about like rice camp and such. Oh, hang on a minute. I'll get back to that. If you'd like to know more, we do update our website, and hopefully we'll be getting a new platform coming this summer. Most of this information is available, just general, what treaty rights are, how we were established, our timeline, and we have a lot of resources for our constituency. Also, we do have a really cool interactive web map that's available on our website. Part of that top bar under the arrowhead, you know, it says reports up there, but we've interchanged one of those to have a variety of information available on a web map that you can go to. Anybody's able to check it out, whether it be boat launches, wild rice lakes. A lot of our monitoring data from resource management is available on there. Also, I don't think Sherry mentioned it in her introduction, but if you're a history buff and you want some more literature about, you know, how we came to be, this is a publication that we worked on with a contractor about 5 or 6 years ago that really dives into the heart and the legislation or the legalities of how we came to be and case law and things like that. You can find this available on our website, e-format, or let me know and I can get you a hard copy. Stop by our office as we are open again. I want to say miigwech for your time. Thank you for listening and learning. I hope that you might walk away and have a better appreciation for the land on which we reside. If you're like me, I'm a settler. You know, I'm able to reside here based on transferred rights from Native peoples, and our whole way of life is basically because that treaty was signed. We want to go to a movie on Friday night. Well, we can't. Guess what? Because we have access. For those of you, I know that you guys are working. I made this note. I didn't want to forget it. For those of you that are working with the Finland Wild Rice Project, I know that they have a processor on site there. As of last year, we also got a hold of a wild rice processor. It's a smaller unit that actually can be moved from place to place. And so if there is any need, you guys are welcome to come here to our office or just contact me and we can set up a time to meet if you'd like to get some rice processed. The equipment, we're learning to hone it in a little bit. It needs a few tweaks here and there, but we're really excited because it's one of the issues that people don't want to rice is they don't have access to processing, so, or affordable processing. With that, I would like to open the floor and give you guys a chance to ask some questions. Sherry, do you want to facilitate? And I see nobody put any questions in there right now, but if somebody maybe wants to like hold up a hand, we can start that way. Will that work?
I think that would be fine, yeah.
Okay. In my little
Mary.
suite.
Oh, excuse me. Go ahead, Marty.
That's all right. Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, so Marnie, thanks for that excellent presentation. Can you just cover again? I was curious about harvesting for commercial purposes. Can tribe members harvest fish or wild rice and sell it commercially, or is that something that they cannot do? I kind of missed that part.
According to our agreement with the state in which we function under, of what our organization was established to oversee and implement, there's no commercial harvest. So none of our constituency is able to go out and catch fish, turn around and sell it.
Okay.
Now, that's not, from an indigenous perspective, like the cultural values there are taking care of your family and your community. So we know that during harvest season, a lot of people make sure to feed their families extended and close. That's not the same because everybody has different, tribes that have usufructuary treaty rights are recognized different all over the board.
Okay.
And there is a lot more commercial harvest recognized in the Pacific Northwest. I know there's actually some offices up there, like VIA has some offices that deal only in commercial harvest for salmon and stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Marnie. Does the commercialization, it doesn't seem like it also applies to wild rice harvest. Is that true?
In terms of treaty rights?
Yeah.
Yep. Now I'm just speaking on behalf of Grand Portage and Bois Forte bands and our treaty agreement. I don't know what Fond du Lac has. I don't know what any of the bands in Wisconsin have. I don't know the means of Upper Peninsula or anybody else across rice country.
Okay. Another question I had, so you have conservation officers that are out and they're checking to make sure that tribe members are following your conservation code and all. Do they also interact with non-tribal members that they see doing things that are not recommended?
Yes, like violations can be seen by both parties on both sides. So that's what the cross deputization means for our agreement, that our 1854 COs are able to charge state code against non-tribal as well as ceded territory code against tribal. So usually what that means is like safety issues, right? Our guys, we're big on safety, right? If we see somebody acting a fool on a snowmobile, they'll turn around and write them a ticket, things like that.
I was interested in your permit for the license, I guess, of the card that you get that allows entry into the boundary waters. Now, I've been on probably 35 to 40 trips since 1963 into the boundary waters, and I've yet to meet a Native American of any sort. And I'm just kind of curious, how do you allot the camping spots? Because we have to go through this system, not quite a lottery, but the popular campsites get taken up pretty early. And if you go off further, then it's a lot easier, but still, do they have to follow the same rules or go through that same process, the same entry system?
At this point, for campsites, yes. But it is an issue that we know our partners in the Superior National Forest, the management, it's an issue that we know we work together on trying to find a resolution for. We have a memorandum of understanding, and probably the Forest Service agency is probably the easiest to work with, just because we dealt with them for so long since the establishment of our organization. But things like camping and access have been defined as being like hand in hand. A lot of our partners at Glyphwick and the tribes over there in Wisconsin and Michigan have MOUs with Chippewa, the Hiawatha and the Schwamigan Forest on camping. And so throughout the past few years, we've been working with Superior National Forest here for how to reserve those campsites, whether they be just in the forest or whether they be in the boundary waters. It's changing a little bit by bit every year, but they're dealing with every forest across the nation, and our management happens to be a little more tighter locationally. So we're working through that, but I'm surprised that you've never seen anybody. That card, the 1854 card, only acts as an entry permit, not necessarily camping.
Yeah, some of these have been quite a ways in too. So the other thing, I live in Minneapolis, but I grew up in northeastern Minnesota, and I think where I grew up is just barely inside to the east of the boundary line on the Sac-Zim Bog. And I grew up about a mile off the St. Louis River, and with my entries into the boundary waters, but all the people around me working in the mines, been kind of a touchy situation sometimes. And the political structure has changed a little bit over the years. And looking at the polymet and whatnot controversy, I don't remember seeing your group. Maybe it was all encompassed in that. Hear a lot about the Fond du Lac tribe and our band. And are the equal partners, equal supporters of rejecting polymet, for example?
I can't speak on behalf of the bands. However, 1854 Treaty Authority does have representation at those meetings between agencies about meeting the water quality standards. So we are involved in the conversations, yes.
Yes, I didn't see that. Thank you.
Glad that you were able to come and join us.
I'll just speak up. You probably know David Abaz from Northland Food Network, and he's very active up in Lake County. He at a recent meeting, 6-8 months ago, encouraged landowners to allow band members to practice their hunting rights on private land, which is not a novel concept, but I can imagine that could get to be very touchy interpersonally. I'm just wondering if the treaty organization has ever dealt with some of that interpersonal kind of how do you work it out kinds of stuff.
We don't get involved that closely.
Too bad.
Most of our work is working with agencies on public lands, right? And it's easiest because when we work with Forest Service, it's across the board, sovereign to sovereign, essentially, and all the administration falls into place, kind of.
Got it.
However, treaty rights, per our agreement, treaty rights can be implemented on private property. They just have to have permission. That permission has to be with the landowner, and must be given to the harvester themselves.
Yes, there's that legally, I accept that. How you accomplish that is not quite so easy.
That's why that's, goal number 2. What we do is really make sure that lands aren't going to be taken out of public trust. Access isn't going to be limited. So that's what our staff time is dealing with most of the time.
Marty, I have a question, and that is, why is the Fond du Lac band not a part of that? Were they not a part of the 1854 treaty? It looks like some of the lands ceded are in the area they would have been living.
Right. And so most of our management programs, we work with their biology staff in monitoring species of cultural concern. However, it was written up in that agreement, which is available on our website if anybody wants to peruse it. Any of the bands that signed that agreement, if they wanted to back out within a year's time, they were able to do so. Fond du Lac decided to do just that. And we can't necessarily say why. My boss was around at the time and he could probably suggest a few reasons why, but we always say, hey, they're a sovereign, go ask them if you're interested. Some of the things that I excluded from this presentation was some of the case law kind of happening at the same time that our agreement was established. And that includes the Fond du Lac band going through 2 phases of getting their rights validated in the 54 as well as the 37 territory. And finally, the big biggie that really closed the book on any treaty rights issues from a legal standpoint was the 1999 Mille Lacs case. The Supreme Court found that treaty rights and tribal sovereignty are unaffected by state law and regulations, and that treaties made by the tribes under the U.S. Constitution remain in effect today and are the supreme law of the land, actually quoting the Constitution. And so if our 2 bands ever wanted to seek something outside of the state agreement, they would be able to draw from that case law. And so it kind of closed the book on treaty issues in our neck of the woods. Fond du Lac does have their full treaty rights recognized by the Supreme Court. It happened in 2 court cases. It was the first one I mentioned. I think it was 94 was the first one that went through. And then the second one was in 2019, essentially. So, in terms of managing resources, our staffs work well together. But that's where it kind of ends, just because we're sovereigns. Our bands are sovereign.
Perhaps you can help me with this one. And I've always wondered why for ricing the time is from 9 to 3. We've come up with a lot of theories, that gives the wildlife a chance to access the rice beds as well, or it gives the rice a chance to, ripen some more and pop back up. Do the resource managers with the tribe actually have another reason or other times that they recommend?
What I've learned is a variety of reasons, 2 of which you gave, right?
Mhm.
Give wildlife a chance to feed and also give the rice bed time to grow and ripen and rest, if you will. Another one is that in the fall, because of the warm temperatures during the day that fall at night, you get a lot of moisture in the air. You get a lot of dew, and moisture on the rice plants acts as like a bonding agent to the kernels, to the grains. And you want to wait till that humidity and the moisture will burn off in the morning sun before you actually hit the bed. I learned a few years back when we were hosting rice camp, we had a really good planning set up for rice camp. And of course it happened to rain all day. And I learned from one of the elders that you do not rice when it rains. A lot of people don't like to hear that because nowadays we live by the clock in the calendar, but you don't want to damage that rice. And the water sticking to those plants and knocking, going through a bed knocking can severely damage those plants. And so you don't rice when there's moisture on the plants. So that's a really good question. Surprisingly, I'm wondering why ricing isn't recognized for being a little bit later for like daily hours, why isn't it not like 10 or 11 to 3 or 4?
Mhm.
'Cause
Yeah,
sometimes that dew can stick around, so
yeah.
I don't know.
The other reason that we came up or hypothesized was because if it was much longer than that, we would just really be too worn out.
Yeah, right. And all your arms at the end of the day are like, did I see a question over here for Mary Stone? Yeah.
Did you?
And Boozloo, I like to make it known that all the treaty rights that we do have, we've had to fight really, really hard over the last 30, 40 years for, from hunting to fishing to gathering. They were rights that were retained through the treaties with the United States, but in Minnesota and Wisconsin especially, there were family members, cousins, relatives that lost their pickup trucks, their canoes, their boats, just for going and using their treaty rights. It became a battle of treaty rights for 30 years, and some of these cases are still dwindle in the court system today. But I like how Jeff Savage puts it when he says, they're not just our treaty rights, they're also your treaty rights. It gave you the opportunity to harvest the timber. It gave you the opportunity to harvest the minerals under the ground. So we all benefit, and we're finally getting to that point where we understand the more that we work together and understand both sides, the better it is for everyone. Wow, make which.
Is that Mark? Was that Mark who just spoke?
It looked like Mark.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Bonjour, Mark.
Bonjour. Yeah, I'm a little slow with technology. I'm still back in the Middle Ages, so it took me a while to figure out where to click it. But yeah, I mean, that's an important thing. I use the 1854 ceded territory a lot. I'm not under the same restrictions as the two bands that are part of the 1854 ceded territory authority. I can go up the North Shore and the lakes and harvest my wild rice. I can parch it and winnow it, and I can sell it at the farm market if I wish. I can go into the 1854 ceded territory and harvest a deer or a bear, and I can sell the parts of that bear. I can sell the bear grease. I can sell the bear claws, the teeth. I have to get a special permit to my tribe, but I have people all the time question me about my ceded territory rights compared to the rights they have as a licensed buying hunter. But when I show them my tribal regulation book compared to their little pamphlet that they get from the state, I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more regulations to abide by than an average state hunter, state trapper, even duck hunters and goose hunters. I have far more regulations. I mean, my boat size can only be a certain, the hours are totally different. So we live under it. We still, to this day, we still live under a little bit different system. But things are starting to come together as time goes on, and it's good to see. And it's good, I would actually love to hunt with a non-band member so that he could see the spiritual side of taking an animal's life for our use. I have non-traditional people that know that I hunt. A point being, I harvested some cedar here a while back, and I stopped and I had a devout Christian with me, and I took my asema, my tobacco, and I put it down when I gathered that asema, and it struck this whole conversation of, you know, what was this praying to the tree for? And I said, well, I was brought up and taught that there's no such thing as a free lunch, that all these things that God put here for us, if it wasn't for them, we couldn't survive. All these things could survive immensely without us, but we can't survive without them. And I believe that if God made these things for us, aren't they all sacred? So I put my asema out every time I gather something. When I harvest a deer, I put asema out before I go hunting. I give that deer asema when I harvest it. And it's just that gift of respect. There, like I said, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And I wish people would start to learn that more and more and more, and show more respect for the minerals that we take out of the ground and the influence that we throw into the rivers. And people need to wake up. It's going to get to the point where we can't drink the water. We can't breathe the air. So yeah, everybody wake up. Big witch.
Thank you, Mark. It was good to see you, and thanks for coming to our Bawakiganug. Sometimes it's hard for me. I stumble over my words when I'm not in the work frame of mind. Thanks for coming to our Wild Rice Knocking Stick event at the summit. It was nice to see you again. Do we have any other questions?
I have a question, Marnie.
Sure.
Does the 1854 Treaty Authority have any special ask for the Master Naturalist Group? Other than to keep what we're doing and, you know, educating and trying to protect the natural resources as well.
Just three things. Take what you learned today, you know, understand what your rights and obligations are for you existing on this landscape and what you owe to the other relatives around you. Kind of some of the stuff like Mark said. Secondly, I know that you guys have to fill hours, right?
Mhm.
We always have invasive species work going on, and I can get you in touch with some of our staff if you're interested in participating in some of their projects that take place. I know Jeffrey does a lot of work. He's our terrestrial invasives guy, does a lot of work at Hawk Ridge and other locations outside of Ely as well. And lastly, citizen science. How many of you guys are tapping maple trees? Sugaring one. Our climate biologist, Hillary, is heading up a citizen science-based project to look at the timing related to runs on an annual basis with temperature change and the seasonality. If any of you are willing to provide some feedback for that, let me share my screen again. Let me show you a little bit what she's looking for. Anybody who's harvesting sugaring within the ceded territory, we just want a little bit of information on snow depth, kind of a general estimation of how fast the flow is, temperature, night and day, and for how long you're going to be sugaring, you know, how long your run is in your sugar bush. If that's something you guys would like to do, Hillary's information is there, is also on the front of our webpage. Simple and easy. If you guys are sugaring, we would really, really, really appreciate having that data. So I don't know. I really appreciate you guys reaching out and wanting to learn a little bit more. I'm here all the time. And if I wasn't clear on something, I'd hope that you reach out again and say, hey, I didn't understand that. Or stay tuned, watch our website, follow us on Facebook, and see if there's ever any educational opportunities coming your way that you'd like to participate in making wild rice knockers or push poles or hide tanning or you name it, things like that. So
Would you have any interest in working with some people like the Bell Museum folks?
in what capacity?
I don't know yet, because I'm starting to work with the head botanist is coming up to the Saxon Bog, and then the executive director had speak at a group, and it seems to me that since they are kind of the natural history repository of the state, that you should be part of that. I know they touch on some Native American stuff there, but I don't think it's exhaustive. And the other thing I often keep in mind, because as a little kid, don't ask me why, but Crazy Horse was my hero when I was in 5th grade, 6th grade. Now that was not your band, your group, but whoever got firearms first in the race across the country won the victories. And there were a lot of battles, and you had La Pointe up earlier, south of Cornucopia, and Bayfield. There was a huge battle. I know that. And then the final thing is, I found out the first Native American national park in this country on the shore of Lake Superior. And
That's Frog Bay.
yeah, at Frog Bay, and I'm excited about that. My aunt and uncle lived in Cornucopia, and I went there a fair amount in summers. The first baseball glove was from Duke Snyder in Cornucopia. So it's a beautiful area. And any interest in doing something like that in Minnesota?
Is there any interest in that, did you say?
Yeah, you think that's something that could be a potential?
I have no idea. Perhaps. As consultation becomes more widely known and understood and accepted within big project things, we're drawing tribes into the conversation earlier on. We're as a whole, I think, getting better at inclusion through project stuff, as well as being members on the street, being humans on the street. And the one thing that when I work with partners and reminding folks is that if you want input from the bands, you kind of have to understand the community themselves, just because tribal government is usually small, right? There's a lot of pull from different directions where these people have a lot on their plates. And so sometimes they don't have the staff timing to really dive into things as much as they would like to. So just a recognition, like land recognition and things like that is where I suggest people start. But yeah, I mean, we always could. Absolutely. If the timing is right, and that's really exciting. Yes. We love our partnerships because, again, we're a small staff also. We got 5.5 million acres of resources out there. So
Well, it looks like people are very appreciative of what you've shared with us today, Marnie. We really, really appreciate it, and hope that we can collaborate again on presentation or gathering. It'd be nice to do it in person, like go to Rice Camp or something like that. I'd love it.
yeah.
Yeah, but miigwech.
Oh, I understand that Tim Cochran's going to be speaking coming up, the former director of Portage National Monument. Good for you guys. He is awesome, top notch. And another thing you should probably look into, Isle Royal became a designated traditional cultural place by the Grand Portage Band last year. And so there's a lot of interaction happening between the band and those traditional lands of theirs. It'd be interesting. Yeah, he'll know all about that, Tim Cockenrill. But no, thank you guys for listening to me ramble on this Sunday afternoon.
There's a neat book that was published about the wolves and interaction with people, Wolf Island by David Metch. Really good, well written. So thank you very much.
You bet, Eugene.
Thank you.
Miigwech. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Here, what I'll give you my email address. And that's that. Gigawabaman Minoa.